My name is Jeff Byron, and I'll be your moderator today. I'd like to welcome you to the only panel that really doesn't fit directly into an energy conference, and that is this panel, tomorrow's headline, Collapse of Water in the West. However, the conference organizers all agreed that the subject was too important that we not discuss it. And of course, there's a water and energy nexus, and I'm going to take 2 minutes and describe what that is, and then we're going to get down to why we're really here. If you would bring up my slides here for just a moment. As you all know, power plants do use water. There is a nexus there. Also, we generate a significant amount of water in the state and in the West from hydroelectric power. And you may also know that we use a significant amount of energy to transport water, and both in its pristine state and in water treatment around the state. The drought is worsening. Although it's a difficult slide to read, you can see that on the graph on the right, the percentage of area that's in an extreme or an exceptional drought is increasing and has been the last 4 years. And as a result, the generation of electric power from hydro is also decreasing. This shows the 2014 curve. I can assure you that 2015 will be substantially below that. And then, of course, what's been making it up? Well, this data from the Energy Information Administration shows you that principally natural gas has been making up the drop in the hydroelectric power that's been available. But there is some good news, at least I interpret this as good news. As hydropower has declined, look what's been increasing. So it's, I suppose, a fortuitous positive, but enough of all the water energy nexus. That's the end of the good news. Let's see, we're in our 4th year of drought, and local water agency, I should say, following the lowest snowpack ever, on April 1st, Governor Brown ordered 400 local water agencies to which serve 90% of the residents in California, to deliver 25% less water over the coming year. Also, and this is news you may all have read, this month the state announced an agreement with more than 100 water right holders. That's about half of the region's 400 farmers, including some small cities and municipal agencies in San Joaquin and Sacramento watersheds, to reduce surface water use by 25%. Now, they did this in exchange for a promise to not face more drastic cuts this season. I believe this is also a first for the state. Of course, residential customers have been asked to reduce, but they've not done so very effectively to date. As of May 1st, only about a 9% reduction. The hardest hit sector of water users in the state are clearly the farmers. There's hundreds of thousands of acres that are fallow. In fact, projections show about 620,000 acres will be fallow in California this year, primarily in the Central Valley. That's roughly 8% of the 7.5 million acres of farmland. But more importantly, these water shortages also undermine rural economies, both in the short and long term. These additional shortages are going to spread and have more negative economic impact on people in more places. But of course, we like to pick on ag. We like to pick on the folks that use most of the water. In a normal year, 80% of the water in California is used for agricultural purposes. About 21% of that goes to pasture and alfalfa. By comparison, 10% to pasture is equal to all the water used in California's cities. Of course, fruit is the next biggest user at about 8%, but yet many of you may not know that, surprisingly, only 2% of California's GDP is derived from the agricultural industry in the state. Of course, I don't know about you, but about 100% of my food comes from that segment of the industry. So I have a lot of topics that I'd like to try and take us through. effectiveness in the current actions, the allocation of water for its highest uses, the virtual water or water export issue that some of you may be aware of, the distinctions between cost, price, and the value of water. What does the future need to look like in California and in the West? So we're not going to solve all those problems here today, but we have a very good panel that I hope will help inform and enlighten you so that you can be better informed on these issues, because they don't seem as though they're going to go away anytime soon. First, we have Ms. Frances Spivey-Weber. She's the Vice Chairman of the State Water Resources Control Board. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to read the mission of the State Water Resources Control Board. She has a tough job. Preserve, enhance, and restore the quality of California's water resources and drinking water for the protection of the environment, public health, and all beneficial uses, and to ensure proper water resource allocation and efficient use for the benefit of present and future generations. She's been doing this for a while. She's very expert in this, and we're glad to have her here today. To her left is Mike Chrisman. Mike has come all the way from Visalia today. His family business has been farming for 4 generations. But he's also the former California Secretary of Natural Resources. He knows the challenges of preserving and protecting. And he also knows personally the challenges of running a family business that depends upon water. Thank you both for coming all the way to Silicon Valley. And then on the end, to their left, is Leon Sheptitsky. He's the Executive Director of the Water in the West program, and that is part of the Stanford's Woods Institute for the Environment. He's an attorney. He specializes in water quality, water use, water restoration. He knows water law. And he's developed some innovative legal and policy tools to help address watershed restoration. He also knows how vexing our current system of water allocation is in the West. However, I'm hoping he can provide some insight on how we might be able to address existing laws and solve water allocation. So the format is, I'm going to ask each of my speakers to give some introductory remarks. We'll see if we can address some of these issues with some Q&A, and then we'll turn it over to you all for some open questions and answers. I understand we have a little dispensation from the conference director. I think we've got 5 minutes that we can go beyond in the program. So, having said all that, Ms. Spivey-Weber, would you like to go first? You
Sure.
can stay right there.
I think I'll stay right here, if that's, I can't see who's behind the podium, but I think I can see most everyone. Hi. Yes, I am Fran Spivey-Weber. I've been on the State Water Resources Control Board for a little over 8 years now, and I have watched the water issues and the text of or the title of our session start to happen. Is there a collapse? Is the next headline collapse of water in the West? I would ask all of you to vote now and then vote later, in keeping with our earlier panel, but you can vote internally. Do you think this is true? And then when we finish, do you continue to think it's true? Personally, I think it is not true. I think what we have done in the state of California, which we can easily undo, is we have built up a demand for water for every kind of thing, whether it be having long showers or big green lawns or alfalfa and for export to China. We have built up a demand that is not necessarily tied to our needs. What we are doing now with this drought and what the governor has done in his several executive orders is he's created a big reset button, and we've punched it, and we've said, okay, let's reset our water demand to fit what we need for jobs, what we need for recreation, what we need for food, what we truly need, not what we the Joneses have that we would like, that we think we might put out in front, but what we really need. And in fact, we'll know more at the end of this summer, but we expect that roughly 25% of the water use in urban California will be reduced by the end of this year just by not doing things that you don't need to do. It's really, we'll see. It hasn't happened yet, so you'll have to watch as well as I do. But right now, the early numbers that are coming in for May as to what people have, finally, it's kicked in, and what people have done in terms of reductions, they were reducing their water use by 13%, now they're reducing it by 28%. It is really going off the charts, and how did that happen? And I think it's a testament to this conference as well as others. The public has a role that they have said we will play. This is not a government decision. This is my decision, what I do with my lawn. This is my decision, how long I take a shower. This is my decision. Companies are saying, you know, I hadn't really thought about it, but I can use the last rinse water from washing dishes in Wahoo Tacos, which is true, and then reuse that water to rinse off the dishes before I put them into the dishwasher, and thereby saving about 33% of the water that's being used. The governor recognized this, and so in his executive order, where he ordered the Water Resources Control Board to limit the amount of water that, or to encourage local agencies to limit the amount of water and local folks to limit the amount of water that they're using, he also said that he wanted the CEC, the California Energy Commission, to hold a technology, to basically promote technologies that do more with water and energy, more efficiency in both the water and energy sector. Those programs are getting kicked off this summer. There'll be a very large conference by invitation only, but perhaps you know someone who knows someone. There'll be a big conference in Sacramento on the 10th of July, and this is a very, very exciting opportunity. So he has challenged the state to not only save water, but also to create jobs while we're at it. And I think we're going to do it. Thank you.
Chrisman.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here today. Let me put a little broader context to what Fran said. You know, we are, as you've heard, I know you've read in the paper, and you heard coming into this conference, I know, you know, and we've all experienced it on a daily basis. California's in the 4th year of historic drought. But these kind of historic droughts are not atypical for California. If you go back 300 to 500 years, I mean, these kind of boom and bust cycles relative to water supply are very typical of the climatic conditions, the Mediterranean climatic conditions we have in California. Of course, the issue today is, as opposed to 30 or 40 years ago, we have almost 38 million people with straws in the, straws in the water supply, needing that water in competition for that water. So the demands today for decisions relative to how we manage that water are greater than they ever have been. You look at the various engineering projects that were designed for California, very much in keeping with what the people of California voted for. The State Water Project, delivering 4.4 million acre feet. People of California voted on that back in the 60s. And are delivering water both to agriculture and municipal industrial users south in the Delta and south of the Delta, clear into Southern California. You look at the Central Valley Project, the largest Bureau of Reclamation project solely within the confines of a state boundary here in California that are delivering also water both to agriculture and to municipal industrial users. I mean, it's been a very conscious public policy decision to move where the excess water is, 2/3 of the water being in Northern California, to where the demands are both in Central, and 2/3 of the demands are in Central and Southern California. That was a very conscious decision. The voters of California and Congress of the United States all bought into that, as did the people, because the jobs it created and the industries that grew out of it. We're now at a time where we've given the drought and given the demands for water, we're at a time where we got to relook at that. The governor's relooked at it, the State Water Resources Control Board's looked at it. You know, from an agricultural perspective, I mean, I live in the Visalia area, my family's farmed in the Visalia area since the 1860s. And essentially, that's an area that's changed. I mean, my great-grandfather, and this is a story that's told over and over in California, but I think it's important to understand. I mean, he came out from Arkansas during the gold rush, and not ever hitting anything up in El Dorado County, came into Tulare County, and he and a brother came into Tulare County, and they filed, and when after the Homestead Act passed, he was married by then, the early 1860s, was able to file on 300, each of them on 320 acres because it was swamp and overflow land. So each of them could file on a section of land, or they filed on a section of land in exchange for draining that land and making it productive. That's a story that was told all over the West, both here in California and all over the West, and made the land productive. When the Right Irrigation Act passed in the late 1880s, growers got together, farmers got together, and began to set up ditch companies and other water companies, began to move water for irrigation purposes. The industry grew. Industry grew out of that. Again, a story told over and over, not only here in California, but all over the West. Both with the history and with the development of water in California as we're moving supplies around. Agriculture is a big consumer. Agriculture does not use 80% of the water in California. Agriculture uses 40% of the developed water in California. Developed water is the water that is in reservoirs, behind dams, and is moved through canals. Between 50 and 55% of the water in California is maintained for environmental purposes. In other words, stays for in-stream uses, management of scenic waterways, and other uses that are attuned to the environment. It evaporates, it's recharged into the underground. So I mean, again, you've got to put the use of this water in context as you look at the demands. Should we be not doing what we're doing? Absolutely not. Absolutely, we should be doing what we're doing. The groundwater law that just passed, that the governor just signed, long overdue here in California. The first, California is one of the last states in the nation to really take a look at a comprehensive management look at how groundwater is managed in California. Again, long overdue. Again, and as a state, we're responding to it. We're responding to it in a very positive sort of way. But we've all got to be pulling together. We've all got to be pulling together because it's going to be a big nut to crack, particularly if this drought continues. And so again, your presence here today and your involvement in these issues are critically important.
Thank you. Mr. Sheptitsky.
So it's humbling to be, thank you for having me, first of all. And second, it's very humbling for me to be up here with Fran and Mike because they both every day have to make such difficult decisions related to water use in California. Fran's entity, the Water Resources Control Board, has to make difficult decisions about who gets water and when they get it, and they're taking a lot of heat for that. And Mike, as a farmer, having to make decisions about making money with a limited amount of water. And I just get to sit here and comment on what they do. So it's very humbling to be on the panel with both of them. And I won't talk very long. I think we should get to the discussion. But I will say, I'll echo some things both of them said. The one thing I'll say that echoes what Fran said is I'm very optimistic that we won't see the collapse of water in the West. Our water laws are over 150 years old and initially arose in the context, as Mike explained so well, the settlement of the state and the settlement of the West. So we have an antiquated legal system. It's been updated, but the core of it is still antiquated. We have infrastructure that's at the youngest, maybe 50 years old. We spent the 19th century developing the basic system for allocating water. Then we spent the 20th century building up infrastructure for distributing it across the state. And so that infrastructure is old as well. And the progress that the state has made during the drought is just amazing. First of all, with the passage of the groundwater law, which you have to realize what an important source of water that is, and I'm sure we'll get into this. It was completely, in many parts of the state, completely unregulated and continues to be unregulated, sort of compromising the state's water future. And then with the governor's recent actions on urban water efficiency, really pushing cities to look at what they really need water for and what they don't need water for is really a sea change for the state, and is pushing the state in a state of mind really where it needed to be to begin with, which is we live under the constant threat of scarcity. So even in wet years, and this is I've got 2 points to make about my level of optimism. So one of the conditions of my optimism is when the drought ends, we all have to continue acting like we're still in a drought. We live in a state where we're at a constant threat of water scarcity. The governor and the state legislature and farmers across the state and cities across the state have taken critical steps to be more water efficient, to allocate water better, but none of it will matter if that all goes away I still say when, not if, when it ever starts to rain and snow again. So I think that's a huge challenge for the state. It's a political challenge as much as it is any other kind of challenge. The second thing I'll say, and it's interesting to sit here at the Silicon Valley Energy Summit, especially the last panel talking about the end of the internal combustion engine, and think about what the parallel is for water. But I think the last thing I'll say is I don't think there are any quick technological fixes for our water problems. There are certainly roles that technology has to play here and there. A lot of the solutions are already on the table, and there's not one solution that's going to deal with all our problems. There's a whole host of kind of a portfolio approach to dealing with the state's water issues and shortages, but there's this, it's more than a technological problem, it can be a political problem. So we have lots of great solutions on the table, but there's this really steep political hill to climb to get, as and I'll echo something Mike said, we all have to be in this together. It's critical that everybody in the state realizes it's our water, and we all have to share it in a rational and effective way. But getting everybody on that same, at that same table with that same frame of mind has not happened very many places in the West. It's maybe starting to happen some on the Colorado River, which we can talk about a little bit. But it's a big social and political challenge for the state as much as any other kind of challenge. So that's an important thing to keep in mind as our discussion progresses today.
All right, let's get into it. Is this a drought problem, or is this a structural problem with the way we're set up in California? Is the way we manage water arcane? We have over 14,000 statements of diversion and use that reflect riparian and pre-1914 water rights. Some people get water essentially for free at the surface, while others, including cities, can pay 100 times as much. We've got what I call the race to the bottom. The deepest straw gets all the groundwater. Mr. Chrisman was just telling me the house well is dry. He's digging a new one this summer. So are we managing water properly for its best use in the state and in the West? I'm going to ask Leon to start.
Well, that's needless to say, a really complicated problem, and I can maybe give a couple of examples.
That's what we're here for today.
That's right. Here. So you said it's a drought problem or is it a structural problem? It's unquestionably both, okay? So there's absolutely no question that we're in a really bad drought. And occasionally you'll see people say that the drought's been made worse by this policy or that policy. And that may be the case, but a lot of the real hardship that people are undergoing now is in large part because we're in a really unprecedented drought. So to slough off all our problems on bad policies, I think, is not giving Mother Nature her due credit. So that's one thing I would say. And I think that there are, the reason I said it's a complicated question, and I'll give a couple of examples, is there's just a whole host of ways that our water management system can be upgraded and modernized. So one example is the groundwater law, okay? So right now, people are pumping a lot of groundwater to cope with the drought, okay? And some people estimate that the annual rate of overdraft of groundwater in California is 2 million acre-feet a year. To give you some sense of how much that is, the state uses consumptively uses between 30 and 35 million acre-feet a year. So it's some not insubstantial percentage of the state's annual water use. Some people have estimated, scientists at NASA using satellite data have estimated that that rate of overdraft during the drought has increased to something like 6 million acre-feet a year. Okay, and so all that water is being drawn down and it's not going to be available for the future.
Nor is it going to replenish anytime soon.
Well, so here's the thing. I think it's perfectly appropriate to rely on groundwater during a drought. That's a perfectly appropriate water management measure. But what we have not done historically, and well, let me back up. In some parts of the state, we've done this. In some parts, we haven't. Any one of these issues, you can find somewhere in California where they're doing it exactly right. So even the state as a whole, if we just learned from everything that's going on in the state and shared it broadly and everybody adopted it, we'd be fine. So if you've got aquifers that are being drawn down intensely during the drought, the question is, what do they then do when it starts raining, okay? And if they're taking some of the excess water during wet periods, or they're taking water from their sewage treatment plant and treating that water and using all those different sources of water to recharge the aquifer during wet periods, so that the aquifer rises during wet periods, then that water's there and you can rely on it during drought. But right now, in a lot of places, there's no mechanism to do that. In the southern part of the state, some of the coastal areas, they rely on groundwater heavily, but then they recharge it with different sources of water. But then there are other parts of the state. In those parts of the state, the aquifer goes like this, goes down during wet periods, goes down during dry periods, up during wet periods. In other parts of the state, it just goes like that, down. And so if we had and I think the new law is really the most important step in this direction, some requirement that the water be managed sustainably. The new law gives localities power to figure out how to do that. Maybe they'll find alternative sources of water during wet periods, and we'll see the aquifer levels stabilize over the long term. So it's not the issue is not that we're relying heavily on groundwater during drought. That's a perfectly natural and appropriate thing to do. It's what do we do with the aquifers when it gets wet, and how do we recharge them, and that's something we're not doing a good job of.
So he took it down the aquifer path, Mike, but I mean, you were charged, and I know you're an environmentalist, you were charged with protecting resources. Are we doing permanent damage to the aquifer at this point? The deepest straw wins. That's why your wells are going dry, correct?
Yeah. In certain parts of the state, that's happening. In certain parts of the state, depending on the overburden, depending on the soil types above these aquifers, those aquifers are those soil water holding capacity of those soils is being reduced. And it's being chronicled right now.
So we're not scientists, but you must be concerned about this. You're in for the long run.
I am.
Are we doing it? Are we committing environmental suicide here with our aquifers?
Well, it's a challenge. Let me answer your question relative to the organization of water. I mean, when we talk about how water is being managed across the state, it is really arcane. There are way too many water districts, irrigation districts, water management districts across California that were all put in place over a period of time, voted not only by the legislature but by the voting public in certain localities over the years, all for very, very good purposes. But the problem with all that is that they're oftentimes working at opposing opposing positions relative to the management of water in California. That's one thing that is an area that's got to be resolved over a long period of time. And that really, and I know the governor's looking at that, past legislatures have looked at that. I know the state board has had long conversations about it, because I mean, that's something the state board has to deal with at every meeting practically. I mean, how are we going to harness all of these folks that have the authority to manage water in the regions? How are we going to manage it sustainably for the people of California? The groundwater law is an attempt to do that. And are the water laws that we have in California, the pre-1914 water rights, the appropriate rights, all the rights that have been inviolate up till now, are they all in question now? And so the legislature, you know, the state water board's going to have to look at it. There's going to have to be gubernatorial leadership in terms of posing these questions in a way that gets everybody from the grassroots involved in trying to resolve these issues, because absent that, these will go right to court, and there'll be a long-standing court actions relative to most of them. Some of it are going to anyway, and some probably don't have any choice in that. The other issue has to do, from where I sit, has to do with the issues of climate change. You heard it talked about earlier today. I come from a part of the state, the central southern San Joaquin Valley, who we all, and in our part of the world, as in most parts of California, but in our part of the world, we have a real strong dependence on snowpack in the Sierras. And the snowpack of the Sierras we depend on as a water storage for the water storage capacity of the snows, for the snow that comes, that hasn't come in the last 3 years. That's why we're overdrawing the water, you know, the groundwater now. Again, as you look at the drought and you look at the various regions around California, some of these areas have, over the long term, done a pretty good job of managing groundwater. There are various conservation districts in the Kings River Conservation District, Cuyahoga Water Conservation District. Some of the districts down in Kern County have done a really good job over the years of managing their groundwater, putting in sinking basins, and in years of high flow, getting those sinking basins full so the groundwater can get recharged. We need to do more of that. We need to get the legislature more involved in instituting water banks up and down the state of California. Water banks are underground storage facilities. I mean, you don't build them. You just you put the water back in the underground, and it's stored underground, as opposed to building large storage facilities on river storage facilities. Kern County's done a really good job of that over the years. We need to expand that. So these are some of the issues that are being talked about. Some of the issues we need to move off dead center on, but there's ways through it, and we'll get there. I mean, we really will get there. But it's a challenge like we've never had, because of the 38 million people that are paying attention to this now and are demanding action.
And that's one of the joys of, if there's a joy, one of the joys of being here now, being on the water board, being in California. We actually are staring a crisis. Clearly, 4 years of drought. Actually, it's probably closer to 11 years of drought, and maybe even 20 some odd years of drought if you go back and look at the few high years and put them in context of the many average to below average years. It's just that we're in an extreme drought right now. That's what's making it big. But people are paying attention. There is no one, or very few, who doesn't know we are in a drought. And I can tell you, this is the first time anyone has truly paid attention to major water issues in my experience. And I've been around for quite a while. So we have got people's attention. Now we need to be working with them as they seek to shape their own future. We heard at the lunch debate about envisioning your future and what it is you want to do. The future that I envision has 5 parts. One part, then this is really for the state of California. One part is a portfolio approach to water supply. Having recycled water, having desalinated water in brackish areas as well as the ocean, having a huge conservation program, having gray water, having groundwater, having imported water, but using it all for the value that it is. The second thing is to have agreements. In some cases, it'll be adjudications where the courts go in and actually say, you get X amount, and you get Y amount, and you get Z amount, or the equivalent of an adjudication, which you have in Orange County, where they have come to a more flexible, but nevertheless a quite firm agreement as to how they will use water. So adjudications is another. Reduction in the number of water agencies, little tiny, you can't believe how tiny, water agencies there are all over the state making decisions for a block, for a square mile. It just shouldn't happen. But as the cost of water goes up, the pressure on these very small systems is going to get quite high. And I think we'll start to see what I'm calling mergers or consolidations. And the governor is supposed to this week have signed, I haven't checked my email lately, a legislation that would allow for these consolidations. We're going to go from thousands of water agencies to hopefully hundreds, and maybe even down to even smaller numbers, because we can't make quick changes and do the quick things that we need. The fourth thing is technology. I do think that there's a role for technology in the future, and the fifth thing is better communications. Now that people are alert and aware of water and the importance of water and their control over water in our lives, they need to continue to get the kind of information that will help them become better managers in their homes, in their businesses, on their farms, and in their communities. And so I think that will be I hope there'll be a growth in apps. There'll be a growth in Twitter and Facebook and all the different kinds of communication efforts that we make, so that water is something that you will check on before you mindlessly use it.
Let me add something to the conversation, both something Leon said and both Fran said. I mean, both talking about the hope and the desire that people continue to pay attention to this issue on an ongoing basis. Well, my greatest fear is, and a lot of us that have been around for a while that have watched these water issues over a long period of time, is we're going to get a wet winter, there's going to be a lot of snowpack, and this whole issue is quickly going to be moved to the back burner. I'm hopeful that out of this very, very serious drought that it doesn't. And that's why these quick actions on a lot of these issues are critically important. The groundwater law, the governor's executive order relative to consolidation of small water districts around the state. Those kind of things that really will have an impact long term for what we're talking about here in California are really important. Because human nature being what it is, I think we all know it. When we get a big snowpack and get a wet winter or two, this issue will quickly go away and other issues will come to the fore. We can't let that happen.
So at the risk of sounding a little impertinent, I'm not completely satisfied with these answers, and maybe the audience is not either. These long-term things are great, but the new law that we've passed may take up to 25 years to implement. We're concerned, a lot of people in California are concerned, what can we do now? What can the State Water Resources Control Board begin doing now to stop Mike from drilling a deeper well? And I don't mean Mr. Chrisman, but I mean the entire Central Valley. What kind of changes in the law are necessary to begin addressing these issues? Because we may be facing the new normal here, not a drought. So think about that for a second. I haven't heard from Leon for a while. What should we be changing the law?
So I think there are lots of ways we could change the law, but I think the law doesn't need to be totally overhauled, is the way I would describe it. So I think that there are lots of things that we could do that would make implementing the law easier. So for example, more data. So if we had better data about exactly how much water each person took out of a river or canal, how much they consumptively used on their fields, and how much they discharged back in the river, and we knew that number for everybody.
Not only these 16,000 so-called rights, some of them are in question.
That's
correct?
right. So so if we had really clear information, I'll give you an example. So one solution that a lot of people propose, which I think is a good solution, is increased use of water markets. So if you have somebody in a drought who is growing almonds and they can make a lot of money with the water, they could buy water from somebody who's growing alfalfa and would make less money. And if the alfalfa grower has a senior water right, they could sell their water to the almond farmer, and the alfalfa farmer makes money by selling their water, the almond farmer makes money by growing almonds, and the water flows, pardon the metaphor, to the highest value use through a market.
But yet there are things that restrict that right now. Counties, most counties, 22 of them, I believe, don't allow you to do transfers outside the county.
So that's right. So there are lots of, the water market system is closely overseen by the state. The Water Resources Control Board has to approve changes in water rights. There are lots of local rules about whether you can sell your water. But a bigger problem is it's often very difficult to ascertain exactly how much water the seller has to sell. That's a number that has to be determined, and then how to get that water to the person that's buying it. So even with our existing rules, just taking the example of water markets, if we had better data, you could buy and sell water much more easily. It's important to change the rules, maybe streamline certain transactions, have more uniform rules across the state, things like that. There are ways you could change the rules, but the whole system from data to management to laws to infrastructure all needs to be improved, and it's all interrelated. So one of the reasons our water markets are clunky is because there's a lot of oversight and a lot of rules. Another reason our water markets are clunky is because we don't have a great data.
Is that something that's fixable, or is that something we have to live with?
Oh, I think that's something that's completely fixable.
It's absolutely fixable, but it's expensive to fix if we do it the traditional way. If we have to put in meters on every farm, if we have to put in meters, we already have meters in urban areas and increasingly in urban areas, but I don't have a meter. I live in a condo. I don't have a water meter in my condo. It comes to the condo as a whole, but not to me personally. We're going to have to change the way in which we collect this data, and we're going to have to move to the future, not go to the past. We cannot be tearing down walls and tearing up streets and asking every farmer to put in thousands of dollars of metering on their farms. We need to be using satellites. We need to be using new kinds of attachments that we can put to existing meter or information collectors either in our energy system or in our water system. And the energy system and the water system are very closely connected, as you said earlier. And so we can actually use some of the energy information or use some of the energy meters to help us with the water.
And we fought this fight in electricity.
Oh, we did.
And we fought it with natural gas. If you can't manage what you can't measure,
That's right.
So you've got to be able to measure first. Mike, you want to add something?
Yeah, and just from an agriculturalist perspective, I mean, we had 3 wells irrigation wells this last year actually go down to where they weren't producing, so we had to drill new wells.
And this is your only source of water?
Well, we have ditch water. We have supplemental surface.
Did you say dishwater?
Ditch water. Ditch
I'll give you some of my dishwater.
Ditch company. And there are a lot of ditch companies all over California, but it's, again, a pre-1914 right that my great-grandfather was involved in. And again, they're all over California. They deliver a lot of water, but the surface water we get is out of these ditch companies. We didn't have any this year, so all our supply is groundwater. And all of the new wells we're putting in, all new pumps we're putting in, we're putting meters in. We're putting meters in because we see the time coming, and all our neighbors are doing the same thing. So agriculture, given the 400,000 to 600,000 acres that are being fallowed this year in the valley because of the drought, all the transitions that are taking place in deeper well, most all of them are putting in wells, or not only, I mean putting in meters, but they see the handwriting on the wall. Again, I couldn't agree more. We're going to have to monitor that. We're going to have to manage it. There's a lot of hesitancy on the part of the agricultural community relative to metering, because how is that data really going to be used ultimately? We meter, if I tell the State Water Resources Control Board that I'm using X amount of water, are they going to come back and tell me, no, you're using too much, you've got to cut way back? Well, they might. So there's some political issues that are going to have to be resolved in this process.
There are some losers in
and
this
there will be,
process.
there absolutely will be.
So maybe that gets down to the issue.
There's some winners and losers in this process.
Maybe that gets down to the issue. Are we using the water in the state for its best value, right? The answer might be to a farmer, yes, because you're planting crops that have the most, what's the right way to put it? I'm not an economist, that have the best payoff: strawberries, almonds, et cetera, the kinds of crops that use a lot more water. I don't know if you've all heard, I think everybody now in the state of California knows how much water an almond uses. It seems that's rather widespread. But, you know, put a tomato plant in, not quite as valuable, but it uses a lot less water. So are we doing the right thing? Leon, are we doing the right thing? Are we using water at its highest value? Maybe its highest value is so I can, you know, take a longer shower. What?
No, so that's, I'm not gonna address that comment. Maybe if I was sitting in Fran's seat, I could judge that. But,
Yeah, that's right.
so that's the whole challenge is to make that happen. And the one comment I'll make about it, and there's lots of ways you could do it. So we've got the existing system, and the question is, how do you make modifications to the existing system that will allow that to happen? And one modification is to make markets easier, so the people that value the water more can buy it, and the people that value the water less can sell it and share in the value that their water right is generating, even if it's on somebody else's land. But you brought up the almond thing, so I'll just briefly say something about that. I think it's easy. I think what we can't do is make rules about what people can and can't grow with their water.
Right.
You know, so I don't know how you would make a rule that would say you have to make you can't grow alfalfa, or you can't grow this or that and the other thing. That's just not what we do. So the question is, and I think it's unfair to make a big fuss about almonds taking a gallon of water per almond, because in fact almonds are an extremely high value crop, and you make a ton more money by using. I think I've seen numbers that are a little bit all over the place, but the revenue per acre foot that you put on almonds is something like $1,500 per acre foot of water that you use on almonds is the revenue that you generate. It may be a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, which is extremely high value. So we can't make rules about that. But the thing is, we have to have some policies and other systems that make sure that water is managed sustainably and for the long term. And if we have good rules, then we just have to trust that the water's going to the right place, and we allocate it to people in a certain way, and we trust their judgment about how to use it. And there are lots of ways of doing that. So a lot of people have talked about price. So if water were more expensive, it would be allocated more efficiently. Now, there are lots of barriers, legal barriers, to increasing the price of water. Yeah. So if you take for example the water that farmers buy, there's a state water project, and of course a lot of farmers get water from the Central Valley Project, and that has very long-standing rules about the price of the water. So there's lots of legal obstacles, but one way would be to increase the price of water. Another way would be to have, and I think the groundwater law will play a big role, is having rules about recharging aquifers. That'll make sure that cheap water when it's available will go to recharge aquifers. So I think there's a whole cluster of policies, and if you start to fix them, some of these efficiency problems will start to deal with themselves.
But I guess one thing, as we're getting close to the end, I'll make a pitch for the regulator, the very smiley regulator. Most people, if they don't know they have to do something, won't do it. Now, I'm not saying we should tell people what they should grow, but we should tell them what kind of information they must have in order to get the water that actually does not belong to the individuals who are using it, whether it be on the farm or in the cities. It belongs to the people of California. It's part of the Constitution. And so we are going to need to require information, better information. We are just now, for those of you who are in electricity, we're like 20 years behind you in terms of getting information for water. We're asking the poor farmers who have the 1860 water rights to come in and show us proof that they actually have that water right. Well, they're having to spend hours in the archives going through old newspapers and deeds and whatever to come up with this, because we've never done it before. We now are doing it, and
that's a little more than 20 years behind.
Yeah.
It is, well, that's true, but they're doing it. The farmers really are doing it. And so we have a lot of catch up on the data side, on the information side, to get it up to par with energy. But we will not get there voluntarily. I'm just telling you that right this very second. There is nobody, no agency, no anyone who voluntarily, maybe 40% will, but 100% will not voluntarily come up with the information.
So Mike, I want to go to you, but no one is suggesting that we're going to tell you what to plant.
No.
For God's sakes, it's costing you a fortune to get that water out of the ground. You need to use it on the highest value you can. We could debate whether or not that water under your ground is, as Ms. Spivey-Weber said, is all of Californians or it's yours. Maybe that's why we may need to change state law. But let me ask you. Go ahead.
But for years and years and years, property owners have considered the groundwater under their land, our land, as our water.
In how many states
it's a
of the
private
union?
property right.
In how many states of the union do we do that?
I don't think there's any other state that
That's
considers
right.
it that
California is somewhat unique.
Yeah, very.
No, it's strange, it's odd. These two states don't get paired very much, but it would be California and Texas.
California, oh, okay. California and Texas. Well, so at the end of the day, those are the kind of things we're going to need to change. I look at the technology that agriculture has instituted over the years. You heard about drip system and sprinkler systems out in the permanent crops that, are supposed to conserve water. Essentially, they over the long haul, they really don't conserve the water. What they do is you can manage the water better to get higher yields out of the crops you're growing, and it's worked very, very well. So I absolutely agree with Fran. There's an integral place for the regulator in this, but the agricultural industry has to become a partner in this process. They're going to have to get, in many instances, like we were in the groundwater law, drug kicking and screaming to the ultimate solution. But at the end of the day, we're talking about very, very significant changes in the way we've done business heretofore. And it's just a simple fact. It's just the way it is because it's gotten that far. And so, and I think at the end of the day, agriculture will become a part of it, but it isn't going to be easy over the long haul.
So we're going to do lightning round here. I've only got about 10 minutes left, and this is what I want to do. I've got one last question, short answer, open it up. Do I have microphones on the floor? Okay, great. So what we'll do is oops. Who needs this? What we'll do is, let me ask my question, open up to the floor. I need short questions, short answers, because I want to give each of them one last minute for their final remarks. Let me ask you one thing. Don't give me 5, don't give me a dozen. What one thing needs to change in the future if we're going to address this issue in a significant way? What one thing in the future? Whoever's ready to go first, go right ahead.
Adjudication.
Wait, explain.
Watersheds need to be adjudicated or that are agreed upon how much water in that watershed is allocated to the various and sundry users.
Sounds like you got to measure it.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Significant long-term leadership, both from the legislative perspective and the water user community and the regulator community, to keep this issue forefront, to get these critical decisions made before we get another wet year, fast.
So I would really strongly agree with Fran that we need some sort of system that people know exactly what their water rights are, how much they have a right to use, which is what adjudication would do. So I would agree with that, and then I would add we really have to have policies in place that make sure that during wet years we're putting aside water for dry years. We can't fix the drought once it starts, and we need policies to conserve water even in our most water-rich years, so we leave water for our drought years.
All right, very good. So I'm going to let my microphone people decide. I'm not picking them in the audience. Microphone people, come forward. We're going to go back and forth, left, right. I would like your name, affiliation, short question. So start on the left first. Go right ahead. Please stand and name and affiliation. No one can see you when you're sitting.
Sorry, I'm on crutches.
Oh, geez, I'm so sorry.
Gotcha.
Well, you may sit down, my dear. You may sit.
Gotcha.
Dimitri McBride, the County of Santa Clara. Very quickly, in terms of long-term planning, the state I know is looking at CEQA, which has historically used past patterns. Are they looking for long-term planning, and FEMA's doing the same thing as well? Or are they doing long-term planning with an eye towards the future in terms of projected climate change and population dynamics?
Good question. We're in the lightning round. Short answer. Again, I'm just trying to be respectful of the next panel.
The short answer is yes and no. We still, no, I'm sorry. In terms of climate, getting climate integrated into permits, getting climate integrated into water rights, even at the national level and the international level, which of the models or which combination of models should we be using as we move forward? We're looking at that, so that's the yes part, but we're not there yet, and I don't even know when we will get there.
The Department of Water Resources is putting together their water action plan, and they put together a water action plan for every 5 years. Climate, back in 2000, I think it was 2005, they began to institute models into the plan itself. In other words, if we get X amount of rainfall or snowpack, this is what's going to happen. And if the projections relative to climate change, the warming of the climate are such that we're getting less and less of a snowpack at certain elevation, this is what we can expect relative to water yield. DWR has been doing that since 2005. So that really has been, since that period of time, put into the water planning for the state of California. Does it need to get better? Yes, it really does. But they've recognized it since then.
So who has the microphone over here? Please identify yourself.
My name is Ronaldo Vesaliza. I'm an architect with Alisto Engineering Group. And my statement is, we don't have a water problem, we have a water distribution problem. And if we can build a pipeline from Canada to the Gulf, why can't we build a pipeline from the Mississippi to California?
All right, so there is a question
everything in
there.
between.
There is a question in his statement. Anyone want to take that on?
So that's,
It's too expensive.
Yeah, so right, you have to crunch
And
the
it's not
numbers,
fast.
but what I would say is, the flip side of it's too expensive, is we've got lots of sources of water available to us that are more our own, more California solutions for California's water problems that are probably cheaper than that solution. So things like recycling wastewater, recycling stormwater, and even desalination is probably cheaper than a pipeline from the Mississippi. I don't know what, I've heard more, not so much the pipeline from the Mississippi, but the pipeline from the Columbia. And the problem, in addition to the problems I mentioned, the problem with the pipeline from the Columbia is Washington and Oregon might have something to say about that.
So you think...
Let me get into this.
Go ahead.
You know, you indicated in your question that we have a distribution problem. Water distribution. I mentioned in my opening comments, we recognize in California we've got a very significant water distribution problems. Ergo, the huge plumbing projects that we developed here in California to move water from one place to the water where it's needed. The question then becomes how we manage that with the additional demands that put on the system. So you're right. It is, and it will always be, particularly in California, it will always be a distribution issue that we've got to deal with.
So if you're used to buying water like this, you're spending 400 to 500 times as much as it costs to take it out of the tap, and that's probably 10 to 100 times as much as a farmer pays for his water. So you got to remember the cost and value issue is really out of proportion. Let's take another question here. I think we're back around this side. Who has the microphone?
Harry Davidian. My question relates to the way we pay for water. In the electric power industry, if I suggested to you that the state float a huge bond and pay for all large power projects going forward, you'd think that was a little weird. But that's what we do with water. No. Last fall, we passed the Water Act. The general taxpayer is paying for those water projects. The users get the benefit of those projects without having to pay for it.
But the users pay that back. The users pay that back over a long period of time. State water project and the federal water project, the users paid that back over 30 to 40-year period to use that water.
But does that adequately, does that pay off the entire portion of the bonds that are being floated?
I'm sorry, the question was?
Does that pay for the entire portion of the bonds that are being floated? Isn't the payment for that coming out of general taxpayers and general revenues?
It comes out, it's a general bond, it's a general obligation bond for the most part that are, these are the older projects. The newer projects they're talking about are going to be revenue projects now, revenue bond projects. But the older ones are general obligation bonds. The people of the state of California front that money in exchange for being paid, and the taxpayers get paid back over a 30 to 40-year period. That's how those projects are funded.
Do you want to add anything to this? Thank you, Harry. I think we're on this side, right? So, Chuck, you're going to be the last question. We're going to go to final comments. Please identify yourself.
Okay, Chuck Wilhelm, Enlight Energy. Question, NASA forecasters, programmers are saying that as a result of global warming and the changes in ocean temperatures, that the jet stream is being pushed much further north now, perhaps permanently. And so what we now see as a 4-year drought may be a permanent condition. Could you folks comment on what I believe the NASA forecasters are saying?
I agree that we don't know what the future is going to be in terms of weather. And we could very well be in an extended drought. Certainly Australia had one that lasted 13 years, but then they had 5 years of rain. That's what they're still having rain. So it's hard to know. But I think as someone said earlier, we have to act as though they're right. We have to reduce our demand to those things that are truly important to this state and to us as citizens. And so we have to lower our demand so that we can meet it through the portfolio that we've discussed.
I will add, there's been, in fact, there was a recent study that researchers at Stanford came out with that showed that it's not clear what's going to happen to rain, but the one thing that the models are universally consistent on is it's going to be warmer.
Yeah.
So in the past, sometimes when it was dry, sometimes it was cool, sometimes it was warm. In the future, the models show there's a 100% chance that when it's dry, it's also going to be warm. And so those hot temperatures and the lack of snowpack is increasingly a reality that the state's going to have to cope with.
So I apologize, but in the interest of time and for our other panelists, we have to end the Q&A there. Chuck Wilhelm, thank you. Chuck is one of the organizers who was the one that really insisted upon us getting this panel on here, so I'm glad he got a question in. I'd like to give each of you one last minute, final comment, something you feel we didn't address, something you feel that you want to emphasize, or that or you want to reiterate. And Leon, we'll start with you. We'll come right back this way.
So the one thing I'll say that we didn't really talk about is there's a regional scale and there's a local scale. And so California's got its drought problems, but it's important to remember that I think it's more than 70%. I haven't checked the exact number this week, but more than 70% of the entire western region is in drought or abnormally dry conditions. And the region that's been suffering from a 15-year drought is the Colorado River region, which California is very closely tied to because Southern California gets so much of its water from the Colorado River. So I just feel it's important to say that the region's kind of in this together. But then the thing I wanted to add to that is a lot of these water solutions are really intensely local. And so it's very easy to talk about what the state solutions are, but really each of these water management districts, each county, each city has to look at their own water supply and try to figure out how to create a more resilient, drought resilient, more diverse water supply portfolio. So it really is going to require a lot of cooperation between the state government and the localities and then all these hundreds of water agencies that Fran's been talking about to really make our communities drought resilient.
Thank you.
From where I sit, I think we heard the conversation today about the new groundwater law, and there was some time frame set up in that groundwater law where the legislation gave the locals in local watersheds the ability to come together and over a period of time design a sustainable groundwater management program. Quite frankly, that process will drive the decision making at the local level relative not only groundwater but water resources generally more than have in the past. My message here is we need to keep the pressure on. We need to keep the regulators need to keep the pressure on. We need to make sure it gets done because we have all of the tools to get it done at the local level. The ultimate threat, of course, is if it's not done at the local level, it's going to get done by the state water board. And I guarantee you, as people begin to realize that will keep the decision making at the local level quicker than anything. So we need the leadership there needs on all fronts need to keep that pressure on to get it done. So I think at the end we're in a good place relative to the hammer over this process that'll keep it going. I think this groundwater law is going to do a lot to keep people focused in that regard.
Thank you.
And I guess creating the community, whether it be really local or regional or multi-regional, as in Southern California. Getting more of entities working together from the energy side, from the forest side, from the ag side, from the urban side, getting those working together so that they can figure, the business side, so that they can figure out more efficient ways of achieving the goals that get set at the state level, I think is the way we will go in the future.
So I believe we're 5 minutes behind. I haven't heard directly from the conference organizer, but I believe that gives you 10 minutes to, there he is. At 3:30 is when you need to start the next panel, so please giddy on your horse. But before you go, I hope that you appreciate the folks that were here today and will thank them with me for being here on this panel.